Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to bring on a new guest today for our podcast. Today, I have Ame-Lia Tamburrini. Is that how I pronounce it? I should have asked earlier. Well, Ame-Lia, she's in actually British Columbia in Canada. So I'm in Sydney. So we're connecting over different time zone, but actually it's pretty easy, surprisingly. I'm really excited to interview her because we had a conversation before, and I really love what she's doing. And I actually see some surprising alignment about what she's doing and actually what I've been writing before in terms of the goddess circle work, which you will hear about how they connected. But obviously, it's all about juicy, meaningful, purposeful conversation. So, first of all, I want to do a very short introduction about Ame-Lia. So, well, I would say, we talked about this before. When I introduce you, I say, should I introduce you as a community dialogue facilitator or consultant or so many things? And sometimes there's no words can really describe. So I will let Amelia tell her story. But briefly, I know that you have over 13 years experience engaging with people and communities around the globe. I know that you work with a lot of people to help them to get connected, have the conversation that it's moving forward for positive outcomes. And you have some principles you're going to share with us about helping people to decrease decisiveness but increase a sense of interconnection, all through the power of a dialogue, which it's super important. I think this whether you look at it from a wider world view or even in corporate business world, we talk a lot about having meaningful conversation and connect people. And I think communication skill is one of the really sought after skill in the 21st century in terms of future of work. But it's easy to say communication, but what does it really mean and how to do it effectively? I think it's really a critical conversation among many. So welcome to my show, Ame-Lia.
Thank you so much. It is so great to be here. I so enjoyed our last conversation and am excited to continue that dialogue here.
Yeah, great. So maybe first of all, I don't know whether I do enough justice towards your introduction, but tell me a little bit about what you do and actually how do you come into being in this unique position in terms of facilitating, encouraging, and helping people in terms of having meaningful conversations?
I started Consulting 2 years ago, and it was based on those 13 years of engaging with communities around the globe on fairly contentious issues. That work was done a lot with indigenous community, with all levels of government organizations, with project proponents in oil and gas and mining, lots of service providers in the community, all to understand how their well-being is would be impacted by these fairly large land use development projects. So it was really divisive in the community, these sorts of big issues. And what I observed during that time with engaging with all these communities is that often the ways in which we engage left people more divided
Mm,
than connected. And I really wanted to, when I was thinking about what do I want to do with Hum, well, I really wanted to create experiences where people could not only inform a decision, but they would leave those experiences feeling more connected to one another. And so that was really the underlying piece of why I started Hum. I think connection is really important to me. I have a health background. I'm a kinesiologist and epidemiologist by training, and that work really taught me that connection is one of our core determinants of health and well-being. I think on a deeper level, that my early childhood experiences from 0 to 10, there was a lot of conflict in my family. And there were a lot of times where I felt scared to use my voice. And so it was really important to me. It has become really important to me that when I interact, I really do want to create that sense of deep connection. And I do want to create safe spaces for everybody to be heard.
Mm. I love it. And you bring out something I would like to go a little bit deeper. When you talk about your 13 years of experience connecting different communities, work with indigenous groups, and talk about sometimes this conversation can be challenging. And also, when you start conversations, sometimes, things actually go backwards because people couldn't communicate properly. So that really, it's interesting. Like, what do you do? Let's say people make the first move and it wasn't a good one. Sometimes critical issue need to be discussed, but when we didn't sound a good first step, it could really sabotage the process. So how do you I'm just curious, how do you turn the ship around? Like, say it's Titanic situation, how are we going to miss it? Because obviously you were facing probably like very serious situation where it affected a lot of communities, but even between a husband and wife or friends, sometimes you start an uncomfortable conversation or an important conversation, but you just kind of on the wrong foot. So what do you do? How do you ride that wrong turn?
Yeah, that's a great question. I, well, there's so many ways in which you could approach that. But I think first of all, it's just creating space
Mm,
for space and time for people to get beneath their positions, so you can really start to get at what are the core needs here that need to be addressed that aren't being met. And often that's what comes up in couples, but definitely in community engagement too, is that people get really angry about things like parking spaces and um, having different people come into their community. But underneath that, there's these core needs of needing to belong and safety and needing to be seen. And so if there's no space in the conversation for that, and you're just up here focused on people's positions, you're not going to get very far. You're always going to be butting heads.
mm,
So that's step one. I think the some of the principles that maybe I'll dive into
yeah.
later really get to like how do you step into those conversations in the first place so that
Mm.
that there's less chance of all of that happening.
Mm. And I'm in so many situations where I can feel the person wasn't really present there for conversation. That he or her is that to not to listen but to speak. So even if they it was the other side was talking, you can tell they're just waiting for the turn to speak, and that's really tricky. Which like as you said, maybe we can dive in that three principles, because I know that you talked about that three core principle that you used to guide conversation and maybe move to more collective action. So maybe you can go through the three principle, and obviously I can ask questions related to that, related to what we just talked about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, I think where you were going sort of slips very nicely into this first one, which is about our intention. And this is really important. And I'm talking about setting our own intention before we step into the dialogue, because this really shapes everything. It shapes the language you use, it shapes how you show up, and it shapes what you actually create at the end of the day. And it's as simple as just pausing before you enter the room or before you start your video chat or however you're communicating these days, and ask yourself, well, what is my intention with this conversation? What is it that I want to create or contribute to?
Hmm.
And often, if we get really honest with ourselves, often we're stepping into these conversations with the intention to persuade people or to convince them or even to change them. And all of that the underlying intention is to have control in the
Hmm.
situation. And if we're really going to connect with people, it's helpful to set our intention for something else, to be able to understand or to be able to relate to the person, or simply that, you know what, at the end of this dialogue I want to feel more connected to this person, and I'm going to go in with that intention.
Hmm.
And that shifts everything. Like you said, there can be a lot of talking being done, and when you're trying to relate and connect, you're often doing a lot more listening in those spaces.
I guess that's, as you say, is to do intention, right? So, but if my intention is to convince you, then
Yeah.
Then maybe it is slightly different, but we're talking about making real connection here. So I guess that will fall into more that basket. So and then the other two principles.
Yeah. The second one is curiosity. So especially when there's tension in a conversation or you're anticipating that, we are really focused on protecting ourselves when we walk in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've armed ourselves with data and information that we're going to present, um, or we do the opposite. If we anticipate that we're just going to be lambasted when we step into a conversation, we might just shut down. And in both of those situations, we are not being curious at all. And the beauty of curiosity is that it really opens our heart. It creates space for us to listen differently and to find those nuggets that we can relate to. Um,
Okay, now I
yeah.
got a question
Yeah.
immediately following up
Okay.
on that,
Hmm.
because I often feel I am tend to be more open when I walk in, but you know how sometimes in conversation suddenly you feel you're being attacked, or someone is having like just perhaps for whatever reason you have a sense that they don't like you, or they have something that they were not listening and they're pretty much against you. So it doesn't matter how open and peaceful minded you are, you feel there's this pressure coming up. And in that situation I often find it's hard to be curious because I felt I'm under attack, so I'm like trying to protect myself, or save the situation sometimes, and then that often would block my curiosity or sometimes more impartial way of listening. So what do we do when you felt like it? So when you facilitate, it's different because you are facilitating, say, two sides or multiple sides. But when you are like imagine what I just said, like I felt someone already has something against me. So how do we move forward?
Hmm.
What do we
Yeah.
go in here in our mind?
Yeah, yeah, it's easier said than done sometimes, especially in those personal relationships, in family relationships, in those dynamics. Yeah, I'm a very different person there than I am in a facilitated room. Uh, but it really comes back to this self-awareness and being able to take that pause, like give yourself permission to step back a second and say, okay, I'm feeling some things, you know, okay, what's happening here? And if you can, just like take that deep breath and come back to your intention. I post my intention on a sticky note on my computer, or I have it in my notebook, and I will read that and be like, "Oh, right, I'm supposed to be connecting here. How can I do that?" And often it's just asking, what are the needs that this person is trying to communicate right now. Um, it's also good to check in with like the truth. You mentioned you felt under attack, and we don't feel safe in those situations, but in most cases, I'm not going to speak to domestic violence cases and things like that, but in most cases we're not really under attack. It's a
Mm,
perception.
mm-hmm,
So just reminding ourselves, okay, I'm safe, it's all good.
mm.
um, I don't know. And yes, it's easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of attention.
And obviously, it could be just in our head in that sense that, oh, he or she is not buying or agreeing what I said. It doesn't necessarily mean they really don't like me, whatever I say. I mean, of course, that could be that situation as well. But going back to, I think, the third principle that you talked about, it's about taking responsibility. So, how does it work in your words, in a practical scenario, in a conversation? What does it really mean?
To take responsibility. Yeah, this is a big one. Taking responsibility is really about focusing more on ourselves than the other person. So it does relate to intention, like what do I want to create in this experience? But it also relates to the thoughts in our head, all the things you were just talking about.
Hmm.
And we have forgotten that our life experiences are a result of our thoughts. So our life experiences are a result of our thoughts, and that is a really hard pill to swallow. I get that,
Mm,
um, but it's a necessary one. And so, what this can look like is if so we're sitting in circle dialogue, and I'm not immune to being triggered, say, when certain dialogues are happening.
Mm,
But when that happens, I need to take responsibility for my feelings. Nobody in that room has caused me to feel that way. This is just something, probably an old wound that is like being
mm,
activated. And um, and that it has really nothing to do with that other person. So I think that's really the big chunk of taking responsibility.
mm. And also, like, I think many wise teachers talked about how, people think about you or feel about you, it's none of your business. Really, you cannot control it, but how you respond to it, that's your karma. So if someone it just bluntly don't like you, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not necessarily your fault or your problem. And it could be triggering someone's wound in whichever ways that happens, but how we react to it. And I think that's another form of responsibility, about recognizing it and not to put it on ourselves or dwell on it. And I think it's a big one, because I think underneath all that, we all want to be liked, right? So human are social beings, we want to be in groups and tribes, and we want to be liked, and we want people to agree with us. That's kind of like an innate need to form connections. So yeah, so you touch on the dialogue circles, so circle dialogue. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is, and what does it do? And you mentioned in our conversation before that different kinds or types, as in some are more for consensus or some are more for just bringing in information. Like, can you tell us a bit more about the circle dialogue, and also like practical examples, like how do you come into knowing or using them?
Hmm. Yeah, circle dialogue is a really special way of coming together. And I've been working in the field for 7 or 8 years, or at least I was introduced to circle dialogue about 7 years ago. But circle dialogue has been around for like hundreds and thousands of years, and it really started when people learned how to control fire.
Mm,
And you could imagine that once fire was created in that controlled way, that people started to gather around it. And then when that happened, language started to evolve, and people were able to cook food, and people felt a sense of safety because people gathered together in this one spot. And so that's really the root of circle dialogue. And today, I think our indigenous communities really are knowledge keepers of this practice, and not all indigenous communities have circle in their processes, but many of those communities tend to use circle for ceremony, for
mm-hmm,
governance, for celebration, those sorts of things. So we can learn a lot from those communities when we implement circle. In today's world, circle is really used in so many different situations. Restorative justice is an area that circle dialogue has been present in for quite some time. And for those people who don't know what the restorative justice is or haven't heard of it, it's really an alternative to incarceration.
mm,
And it's a process that's really focused on bringing the affected party and the responsible parties together and creating a space for dialogue that allows the responsible parties to take responsibility
mm,
and collectively create actions that repair the harm
mm-hmm,
caused. It's a beautiful model and a beautiful alternative to putting someone in jail.
mm. But
So
there
that's
must
a
be
big
in
area.
certain
Yeah.
communities where, so that's the way how they, like, I can imagine in a village, the elder was sitting with the chiefs and say, this is what happened. You gotta apologize and whatever towards that person that you harmed, and then bring in some sort of justice into it. And that's like really interesting. And so it's still practiced today in some communities.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. I work here with Restorative Justice Victoria, and the police department or the Crown refers cases over to them. And we
Mm,
resolve these sorts of situations in circle dialogue, which is really powerful. What I love about it is that it's just such a loving approach.
But
because
how does it work? So someone did something
yeah.
bad or harm someone, and then you bring into to this circle and say, "Hey, tell us all about it." And so, at what point then it's like, okay, if the circle has complete, it's forgiven or resolved, and I mean, where's the end game?
Right. Well, it's a process. And I think this is important to bring up about circle is that the
Mm,
most impactful ones, you're doing a lot of prep work before you step into that circle. This is a really vulnerable space for people to
mm-hmm,
be. There's no barriers between us. We are physically sitting in circle, or we used to. We do this on online these days. And um and oftentimes there is quite a bit of work for people to learn how to take responsibility. It's hard. I think we live in a world right now that is so set up to blame people for the
mm,
problems in the world. We see that on, all the social media streams, all the vitriol that goes on there, and we're not accustomed to taking responsibility for things. So there is a lot of prep work in the beginning, both with the affected party and the responsible party. And then when everyone feels like we're at a good place, we will come together for that circle dialogue. Sort of the end game, I mean, yes, there are a set of agreements essentially that
mm,
get made up, and often these involve writing letters of apology or uh, doing some meaningful volunteer work that actually gets at addressing the
mm-hmm,
harm, or doing counseling work, or whatever that happens to be. And then mentors work with the responsible party to make sure that those come to fruition.
mm.
But at the end of the day, it's a way to view people as human beings. Often we look at criminals and we dehumanize them.
You lock
It,
them up, like basically you
yeah,
put them aside, and that's not having a engaged conversation in a way to really resolve. Sometimes you just like, okay, you just sit over there in a naughty corner and let's hope for the best.
yeah. It actually and it also um,
I mean, I shouldn't
like
say let's hope for the best. I'm sure within incarceration there will be work to, help the inmate and so forth. But the concept itself is very different because I guess the sheer amount of resources and time and love have to put into such circle compared to, in modern day justice system is probably you couldn't, cope with all that. But as you said, there's a lot of work to put in that to really probably go into resolving or addressing the issue in the most effective and fundamental way.
absolutely. Yeah. I have not been in one case, and I haven't done too many restorative justice cases, but at the root of crime is trauma. And
Mm,
some of these people have had the most horrific
mm,
upbringings, and there's so much space for compassion and love. And what I love about restorative justice approach is that it takes that trauma informed lens and says, you're a human being. I'm not going to
mm,
ask what is wrong with you. I'm going to ask, oh, what happened to you? Tell me
mm-hmm,
your story. Because we have to go there to really understand why someone is the way they are. And if we did that more often in our society, we started asking, flipping that question to like, what is wrong with you, to really asking, I'm curious, why is this person showing up in this way? Like I was dying for that question around Donald Trump, because
mm-hmm,
Donald Trump shows up in a certain way, and everybody was throwing vitriol his way, and not asking the question, wow, why is this person this way? What happened to this person in their upbringing? Because guaranteed, if we did that, we would be able to find something to relate to.
mm-hmm,
And I think that's a scary proposition for a lot of people. People don't want to see that we have everything inside of us. We've got all the quote unquote bad stuff, and we have all the good stuff, quote unquote. So that's part of this journey as well.
Wow, it's really powerful. You bring up so many interesting things. And one of them I do feel perhaps my sense is that sometimes we don't want to go deeper and almost giving that space because sometimes we're so angry, we didn't have time, we're in denial. Because to really open our heart to give that person opportunity to say, so what happened, instead of you're bad, like instead of doing the shaming and the blaming, which is so easy and so feel good in that second perhaps, but really do no good to no one, right? And sometimes we just I just want to do that, but actually it doesn't really resolve the problem. And in a way, it's a loving response, that if I'm allowing myself to ask that question, to open and to hear that, to actually be vulnerable, to say, because maybe the story I'm going to hear is going to completely change my mind. And sometimes we actually don't want that, because we just feel so comfortable in hating and disliking this person. So I felt that that could be a very powerful way to think about this. Why? And also, when you talk about social media, and I just immediately felt like, in the circle, you got like elder or with wise people, or in a courtroom, you have a judge, and you may have, different counsels around. But in social media, we completely lose that structure. It's everything goes. If you have an extreme view, you can just blab it over there, and there's no control, there's no care sometimes to put into the parameters, and it can be very dangerous space. And definitely not safe. And I think, we know that from all this news report about how bullying happened, or you just look at the news, that you felt sometimes it's such a landsliding opinion about a situation, and it's even hard to find the other side unless you actually view different things, because otherwise your news logarithm actually have pinned you into one hand anyway. It is so frustrating, right? So what's your view on that? I mean, does you sometimes make you really like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening, and it's contrasting to what you do at work, isn't it?
It's very contrasting. And for that reason, I spend no time on social media because I really do believe that where we put our attention
Mm,
is what we recreate. And for me to absorb all the negative commentary and the blaming, and that that focuses my energy on it. And I'm not interested in that, because I want to
mm,
create a world that has more love and more joy. And so I'm really just, as much as possible, focusing all my energies on creating those situations in my life. And so I don't know if I have much to say on it. I think it's a um I do want to comment on what you were saying earlier, in that it is the more courageous act
mm,
to pause and say, what is in what this person has to say for me?
mm,
And instead of just sticking in our positions, that's a really safe and um, cowardly is a strong word, but it's not a brave
mm.
uh, move. It's much, much braver to be able to sit in the room and listen and be willing to be opened up, like you said.
Yeah, like vulnerability, it's kind of the step one before you can be truly brave. I mean, it's like if
Yes.
you don't jump off the fire, you can't really test yourself. And one of the reasons I like to bring up the circle dialogue is because I didn't know before, but like I was talking to you about in my work, and I know other colleagues of mine doing goddess circle. You know how women love to sit around and talk and all that stuff, and whether it's for social reasons, but it's also really nice to give space for us to be heard and share. So when you bring out the power of the circle dialogue, in a way, for me, it's like, because I just never thought, you know I never imagined other men and other groups of people actually also doing it. And because I'm so fixated on the people who do meditation, or the ladies do this golden circle, but actually many parts of the world practice this type of communication. And I mean, how powerful it is. We bring it to schools, we bring it to work situation where encourages environment. I mean, and then, as you said, where you put your attention to, it will grow, and it will be a very powerful change for our society. And, you know, um, Yeah. So, do you like what else do you see or observe circle dialogue, or what? Do you have any ideas where we can bring in more of this type of tools?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like circle dialogue could be everywhere, and it does exist in all those environments that you just mentioned, which is really exciting. Um, yeah, I mean, the ways in which I'm using it right now, I can speak to that, are really at that intersect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous community,
Mm,
hosting conversations that really try to bridge those worldviews and help people to interconnect with one another. It the circle, it represents a couple of other key principles. One is which we are all interconnected, and that's
mm-hmm,
a core principle of so many Indigenous communities. And it really is a core principle of physics, science, like if you really get into it, and spirituality. And I love how it brings that to life. And so I'm finding a lot of hope by using this tool in reconciliation, which those conversations are complicated, and there's healing that is
mm-hmm,
required, and there's definitely a lot of empathetic listening that needs to happen. But when we can do that, we can create solutions. We can create this new world that we all want to live in.
mm.
So that's one way. I mean, I do host women's leadership circles as well, and I
Very
mentioned,
different scenarios again, but again,
yeah,
will be really impactful.
exactly. Just a space for people to take their masks off, to be able to shed some of those protective layers that I think, as especially as women leaders, we feel like we have to come across as strong, to mentor people, to do all these things, and we still have all of the human emotions underneath all of that. And sometimes we might feel like there's not safe spaces for that to come out. And so
Mm,
I think it's important as leaders that we create those spaces for ourselves to connect with ourselves and our hearts, but also hear the stories of other leaders so that we don't feel so alone.
mm.
And I think there's so much power in that and strength.
Yeah, so you mentioned we can use the circles for like obviously bridging different communities or disagreement or better understand each other. So that's that purpose. And then we talk about the women leaders. I love it because I think it's about discovery, and reflecting on who we are, what matters. So that's a very different purpose. So is
Mhm.
there anything else that you see we can use circle? Because I'm really intrigued about this approach, because often when you go for a learning and training scenario, I felt it's very two-dimensional. Maybe sometimes you have interactive practices, applications, but often it's that there's a teacher and the learner, there's some interaction between. I do feel it's different, but when it comes to a circle dialogue, I felt there's something more to it. And then you're ready to talk about two different purposes. Is there anything else that we missed? Because I think it could be quite a creative tool for people.
Yeah. Well, there's lots that I've missed. I
Oh
think
yeah.
the
Tell me more.
I'll tell you, okay, youth use circles quite a bit. You brought up schools,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's another important area, which sort of relates to restorative justice. It could in some ways when there's like bullying attempts at
Mm,
schools. Often circle is used, I won't say often, sometimes circle is used to bring those groups together, the folks that are bullying and those who are bullied, to have conversation along with some other school members, some say community members, to share in that dialogue and really do the healing work required. And it can be quite transformative.
totally.
Yeah. I think celebration is an amazing way to use circle, end of life ceremonies, birthdays, anything where you really want to deepen a sense of interconnectedness. And there's something that special that happens when people are given the space to speak from their heart.
Mm,
And um, circle allows for that. And one thing I especially love about circle is that it's equally friendly for extroverts and introverts. So often introverts, it's really hard to find their voice. I'm an introvert. I can speak on behalf of some of that group, that when there's just so much back and forth talking going on, I often just check out because it takes a lot of effort for me to jump in. And so in circle, we're often passing a talking piece. And when that talking piece comes to you, you're the knowledge keeper and you get to share, and everybody else is listening to you intently with this intention to connect with you in some way. And then you pass the talking piece along. And so we hear from introverts, which can be such a magical thing. And then on the other hand, extroverts have told me that it's quite refreshing for them to be able to just listen and not feel this need to respond or give advice or support, because there's none of that that goes on in circle either. It's literally just listening, and everybody's wisdom teaches each other as they hear from one
Mm.
another.
And like this is like some two things actually I want to ask before one out of time. One is that I think we can hear the power of these circles and having this dialogue, but the facilitator will play a very important role. So how can we become one or a better one?
It's a great question. There are trainings available. The I did my more in-depth training through an organization called uh, Peace of the Circle, or Circle of Peace. Oh gosh, Circle of Peace, I think. um, and that's one way. There's so many organizations out there that offer trainings. I think what makes a decent circle dialogue host is self-awareness
Mm,
and being able to do our own work to hold space for challenging conversations and not get too wrapped up in the energies that are being exchanged. Because, like I said earlier, it's not like that I don't get, not that my stuff doesn't come up in circle when I'm hosting, but I do need a certain level of awareness, emotional intelligence, you could call it, where I can check in with that and, um, and then still show up to serve the circle, serve the dialogue in whatever way I need to.
mm.
Kay Pranis is a longtime circle practitioner, and she has a few books and resources online that people can find as well. That's what's coming to me in this moment.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I think the self awareness is important thing to bear in mind, but also I suppose practice, because sometimes you see yourself reacting perhaps in circles when you got triggered somehow. Um, and I think that again, you give yourself opportunity to do this work, and sometimes there's nothing beats it, isn't it? That obviously some people are better to start with, but then or have done more training or read more books, but then there's also that piece of self-awareness that sometimes just come with time and practice.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
and I think my last question is related to, like, the buzzword about engagement these days. I hear it everywhere, whether it's about businesses want to engage with the customers better, or learners and the teachers, or all sort of thing. But the engagement itself, like, it seems like a holy grail to so many people. And I felt that you to me, you're an expert in this, because be able to have this type of deep and meaningful conversation to move forward. Actually, this is the whole point of engagement, whether it's moving someone to change your opinion, or to step up and speak up, or to buy your product. It's about moving forward with action. So, what's your tips, advice, or things that you would say on this subject?
I love this question because I think engagement is such an interesting word. And I know I've used it a lot today, and I know it's plastered all over my website. And it has a bad rap, the word engagement, in a lot of the arenas that I find myself in, especially working with indigenous communities who, for many, many decades, have been quote unquote engaged with in a way. that is really perfunctory. It's a checkbox style approach. You're like, oh, I had the one conversation, we're done, we've engaged. And if you look up the word engagement, there it means nothing about cohesiveness, building relationship, or meaningful interaction. It really sort of signifies a battle. You're going to engage with the enemy, or to be involved in, or it's some kind of an arrangement. And so I think my first tip is to find another word that actually that actually has the resonance of what you want to create. And the one I've been playing around with is gathering, or
Mm,
gathering together. And when you look up gathering, that's all about assembling and taking in from scattered places and drawing together or toward oneself and understanding. And to me, that so exemplifies what we really want to do with, doesn't matter if it's our communities, our clients, our family. That's what we want to create when we come together. Okay, so that's step one.
mm,
Find another word. Secondly, my tip is really about thinking of all relationships, all gatherings as your intimate partner relationship. We get we spend a lot of time focusing on how to build an intimate partner relationship, and um, relationships, if you think about it like that, there's stages that you go through. There's that honeymoon period, there's then the, oh, okay, now we're getting real period, and maybe it's a bit tumultuous, and then there's this maintenance period. And if we could think of all our relationships in that way and sort of expect that tumultuous period, and then expect that it's going to change maybe in the maintenance period, and understand that in that honeymoon period, when we first are making a connection with people, why the honeymoon period is so juicy. Yes, there's hormones and whatnot going on, but you're also, you're having a ton of fun. You're asking each other a lot of questions. You're getting really curious, and you are getting to know what's important to them. You're sharing stories, and you're finding your shared values, and maybe you're sharing food. Like, these are the sorts of principles that we really want to think about when we're
mm.
getting together and building relationship with whomever it happens to be.
Yeah, I love that approach because I think about, how so many online marketers talk about, building your list, building your list, warming your list. You can't just like put in static effort about writing newsletter, and you gotta like think about the way you talked about it. I love it because, yeah, maybe at initial period you want excitement, get to know each other, but then you need to show it up in consistent, with consistency and through time, and maybe something more personal, something deeper as you go. I mean, probably the honeymoon period you don't talk a lot about really deep seated stuff yet. But I don't know, like, and I think if we trying to engage with our customers or people we want to have further work with that approach, I think it will be a lot more meaningful and substantial and long term. And I think that's important, and it's a great, I think, example you just give. So lots of food for thought. So I'm going to wrap this up, and I think has been a really cool conversation, and really got me thinking, rather than just on a hamster wheel and doing things, engagement, communicate, but what are we really doing? And
Yes.
what is the real purpose? So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. And if people want to, learn more about what you do, your work, and all that great stuff, where they can find you.
My website is the place to go. I'm at homeconsulting.ca. And on there, people can sign up for my monthly newsletter, where I'm coming into your inbox once a month just to give you tips and tricks to have these connecting conversations,
Mm,
and also act as your cheerleader, because this work is courageous. And
mm.
often, as leaders, especially change makers, it can be a lonely feeling world. And I want you to know that I am right there beside you.
And I think you touched on a really important point. It's like not only lonely and strange sometimes, but sometimes you feel like, am I doing it right? And am I good enough, or am I heading the right direction. I think sometimes as a thought leader, it's healthy to a certain dose of that, because you kind of really need to reflect and examine. But then sometimes it can feel a little bit vulnerable, and it will be really helpful to have, as you said, cheerleader. And I know that you also on your website offer that more information about the 3 principles that we cover, so that could be really good for people to check it out. And last question, actually, is hum consulting to do with hummingbird? Because I do see the bird in the background somewhere. Is it what
Yeah.
it is?
It is. It's so I hum came to me, yeah, through a beautiful friend, but like the acronym is harmony, unity, and momentum, and that's really
Right.
what I'm aiming to create. But the hummingbird, it is my spirit animal. It is my grandmother is who comes to me every time I see a hummingbird. But what I love about the hummingbird is that high vibe energy that it has. And for me, that's why I'm here. I want to create more love and joy, that high vibration. And so the hummingbird just seemed like the perfect symbol for what I want to create.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And for all the listener or whomever may watch this video, then check out the website. I'll put the link down below at the details. And it was been lovely talking to you. Thank you so
Likewise.
much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you.